Joining us now live to discuss the latest out of the Iran political situation is Rod D. Martin. He's founder and CEO of Martin Capital. Rod, good to see you this morning. Let's start with this last set of things that have come in the last 24 hours. The president extending the ceasefire when saying he wasn't. He said he wanted to give them more time to put forward a unified proposal. He's asking for mercy with the 8 women who are on death row. And then, of course, just overnight, we see not 1, but 3 ships attacked by these light boats of Iran. What are you making of the current situation?
Well, let's start with the women, because that clearly factored into the president's thinking. And there's no question that this is effectively a hostage taking by the Iranians. And so, the president is hoping to get a stay of execution for them and tying that somewhat to the negotiations. But that only lasts so long, and it isn't the primary undercurrent. The primary undercurrent is the fact that Iran is losing between $400 and $500 million a day as long as we keep the blockade in place. And, this is what we've talked about before, that in fact, the Iranian closure of the straits actually backfired on it by resulting in this blockade that absolutely closes the region to Iranian shipping. And Iran's entire lifeline is its oil exports. Those have been heavily sanctioned for years, and there's no question that they're having to sell that oil at an extreme discount. But it is really deleterious to their economy to not be able to sell it. They really don't have any other major sources of income. This is about 80% of their budget. They can't pay their guys. They can't keep going. So the president knows the longer this goes on, the more likelihood it is that these guys actually will show up. These many factions that the regime has broken into, they will show up in Islamabad, not to negotiate some kind of deal, but to negotiate their exit and how much of the money they've stolen from the Iranian people that they're going to get to keep when they're in exile on the French Riviera. And that's what he's pushing for. The longer this goes on, the more that is likely.
Yeah, I want to explore 2 of the elements that you shared. One, the naval blockade and the economic impact, and then also what that regime sort of power struggle looks like internally. Besant commenting on X yesterday, in a matter of days, Kharg Island storage will be full and the fragile Iranian oil wells will be shut in, constraining Iran's maritime trade directly targets the regime's primary revenue lifeline. So how does Kharg Island and their own oil infrastructure play into it? Because my understanding is, like, once that needs to be shut down because you have nowhere to put the capacity, it's not just like flipping a switch, and it does have some long-term operational challenges. What might be the timeline on Kharg Island and their oil infrastructure?
Yeah, all of that is exactly right. And when you start shuttering oil fields, it really depends on the technology you have available and how fragile those fields are. This is a country that's been under extreme sanctions for a long time. It's also a country that has taken a relatively small amount of money and put it all into these giant underground facilities and missile programs and nuclear programs and so forth. By some estimates, $500 billion. This is a country with 10 times the population of Israel and half of Israel's economy. Putting that kind of money into things that just absurd. So yes, at a certain point, if you can't ship oil out of Kharg Island, which is 90% of their exports right there, if you can't ship oil out of it, at a certain point, you run out of storage space. You absolutely run out of the ability to pump oil to it. And as a result, you actually have to close the fields. Once you do that, your best case scenario is that those come back online 5 weeks after you turn them back on. 5 weeks can easily be 7 months, depending on the quality of those fields. Not underground, not subsurface, but the technology, the actual pumping equipment, the actual infrastructure that has been degraded so much by their spending on everything except what they really need to spend on. We saw something very similar in Venezuela. The socialist government nationalized the oil industry down there, pretty much everybody except Chevron, and proceeded to just ruin the oil industry because a bunch of corrupt kleptocrats don't know how to run these machines. And these are reasonably sophisticated things. So their oil production dried up to a trickle compared to what was possible. And now, of course, the U.S. is going to go in and help revive that. But Iran doesn't have that option right now.
And Rod, such a great segue into the options that they do have. We had one guest on who described the dance of the cobras as a, leadership. Sort of, they all look at each other. You have IRGC strongmen, you have career politicians. How do they find some way to bring a unified proposal to the U.S.? Do some of them just have to be faced with the decision of death or living on the French Riviera, as you describe it?
That's pretty much where they are. You have the hardliners, not that any of these people aren't hardliners, but you have the most extreme part of the IRGC in control of much of the establishment simply because they have the guns. And that's a relatively new development. Previously, the Ayatollah had moral authority over all of this that translated into pretty meaningful political authority, but the Ayatollah's gone and his son has not been seen. And it's very clear that the top of the IRGC is running most of the things that work. So the official government has largely been sidelined, but it's not gone. And there are these other factions, partly thanks to their much vaunted Mosaic defense, which mostly just served to decentralize command in a way that has now turned into factionalization. These guys have to get their act together. And because they don't have their act together, because they can't come to a unified position, and because they all do have at least some power, they present Trump with this opportunity. But there's more to it than that, because at the end of the day, these guys are in a position where they really can't assert full power. If the IRGC does everything that it can to take full power, it's just looking at Nuremberg trials. It's just a matter of time. And they're all kind of facing that anyway. They murdered 42,000 unarmed protesters in their streets back in January. The atrocities of this regime are just off the charts. And they know if they don't hold on to power or they don't negotiate a reasonable exit, which I think is where this is probably headed in another week, if they don't do those things, then the Iranian people are eventually going to hang them from the nearest lamppost.
Rod D. Martin, so much to look out for. Hopefully all will be revealed in days and not weeks, and we'll be watching with great interest. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.